Hello there, and welcome to the Night Science Facts channel. Tonight, we'll be drifting slowly, gently, and very peacefully into the warm, green, unhurried world of the sloth. One of the most quietly extraordinary animals that has ever hung from the branch of a tree. You have chosen a wonderful evening to slow down. Perhaps the day has been full of movement, full of decisions, full of small things demanding your attention. That is all right. We are going to let all of that fall away now, like a leaf releasing from a branch, turning slowly through the air, finding its way softly to the ground below. There is no urgency here. There never is on this channel. And tonight, of all nights, urgency feels especially out of place. Because the sloth, the patient, quiet, unhurried sloth, is perhaps the single best animal in all of nature to spend the last gentle hour of your day thinking about. Take a moment now, if you like, to settle in completely. Adjust your pillow. Let your blanket rest comfortably across you. Allow your shoulders to soften, your jaw to unclench, your hands to open or rest wherever they fall naturally. There is no position you need to hold tonight. There is nothing you need to be ready for. We are going to travel together to the rainforests of Central and South America, to the cloud forests of Costa Rica, the vast lowland jungles of the Amazon basin, the humid canopies of Panama and Brazil and Colombia. In these warm, green, rain-soaked places, among the mossy branches and the filtered light and the slow drip of water from broad leaves, the sloth lives its remarkable life. It moves slowly, it sleeps often, it hangs upside down from branches with a grip so reliable it requires almost no muscular effort. It does everything on its own schedule, in its own time, at its own pace, and in doing so, it has survived, thrived even, for millions of years, in a world that rewards patience and efficiency above all else. We have 100 gentle, unhurried facts waiting for you tonight. Each one is a small window into a world where slowness is not a weakness, but a strategy, where doing less and doing it very well turns out to be a kind of mastery. So let your breathing slow. Let the day fade. Let tonight be a long, quiet, restful journey through the canopy. And let us begin. The modern sloth, hanging quietly from its branch at perhaps 4 or 5 kilograms, is a modest creature. But its ancient relatives were among the most impressive land animals that ever walked the earth. Prehistoric ground sloths, the giant relatives of today's tree-dwelling sloths, included species of truly remarkable size. Megatherium americanum, one of the largest of the ground sloths, stood up to 6 meters tall when rearing on its hind legs and weighed approximately 4 to 5 tons, comparable to a modern elephant. It walked on all fours across the open grasslands and forests of South America, using its massive curved claws to pull down branches and dig up roots, living an entirely terrestrial life, very different from the arboreal existence of its modern descendants. These giant ground sloths persisted until relatively recently in geological time, the last of them disappearing approximately 10 to 12,000 years ago, around the end of the last ice age. Some researchers believe that early human hunters may have contributed to their extinction, as their disappearance coincides broadly with the arrival of people in the Americas. The image of a sloth ancestor, the size of an elephant, moving slowly through an ancient forest. It is a reminder that the quiet, small animal we know today carries within it the genetic legacy of something immense. The sloth lineage, the order Pilosa, which includes both sloths and anteaters, has been present in South America for a very long time. Fossil evidence places the earliest members of this group in South America during the Eocene epoch, roughly 40 to 50 million years ago. For most of this time, South America was an island continent, separated from North America by the ocean. The animals that evolved there did so in isolation, developing along lines entirely their own, producing forms found nowhere else on Earth. The sloth lineage was part of this great South American experiment in isolated evolution. When North and South America were finally connected by the formation of the Central American land bridge, roughly 3 million years ago, many South American animals, including several ground sloth species, dispersed northward into North America. For a time, ground sloths roamed as far as what is now Alaska and the eastern United States. The tree sloths of today are the survivors of that long, isolated, endlessly patient lineage, carrying 50 million years of evolutionary history in their slow, green, gentle bodies. Modern sloths come in two distinct families, which are more distantly related to each other than they might appear. The two-toed sloths belong to the family Megalonychidae, and the three-toed sloths belong to the family Bradypodidae. These two groups diverged from different ancient lineages and are considered only distantly related, despite their similar appearances and lifestyles. The most obvious visible difference between them, the number of toes on the front limbs, reflects deeper anatomical differences. Two-toed sloths are slightly larger, generally more active, and have a slightly broader diet. Three-toed sloths are smaller, more specialized, and in some respects even more committed to their slow lifestyle than their two-toed cousins. Both groups have arrived, through their different evolutionary paths, at a remarkably similar solution to the challenge of life in the rainforest canopy. A convergence that speaks to how effectively the slow, energy-conserving, camouflaged lifestyle suits the environment they share. The word sloth in English originally referred to the sin of laziness, one of the 7 deadly sins of medieval Christian theology. When European explorers and naturalists encountered these slow-moving animals in the forests of South America in the 16th and 17th centuries, they named them after this quality, seeing in the animals' unhurried movements and long periods of rest a quality that, in humans, would be considered a moral failing. This framing was, of course, entirely misleading. The sloth is not lazy. It is extraordinarily well adapted. Its slowness is a sophisticated strategy, a way of surviving on a low-energy diet, avoiding predators that hunt by movement, and thriving in an environment where energy conservation is paramount. The naming tells us more about the worldview of the people doing the naming than about the animals they named. But the word has stuck, and perhaps, in the quieter spirit of this evening, we can reclaim it. Let slowness be not a failing, but a kind of wisdom. There are 6 recognized living species of sloth, divided between the 2 main families. In the two-toed family, Choleuphus, there are 2 species, Linnaeus's two-toed sloth and Hoffmann's two-toed sloth. In the three-toed family, Bradypus, there are 4 species, the brown-throated sloth, the pale-throated sloth, the maned sloth, and the pygmy three-toed sloth. The pygmy three-toed sloth is the smallest of them all, found only on a single small island off the coast of Panama called Isla Escudo de Veraguas, and is considered critically endangered, with an estimated population of only a few hundred individuals. Each of these 6 species occupies its own particular ecological niche within the broad habitat of the Central and South American rainforest, with slightly different diets, ranges, and behaviors. Together, they represent the quiet, living remnant of a lineage that once included dozens of species across 2 continents. Of all the mammals on Earth that do not hibernate, that live continuously active lives throughout the year, the sloth has the lowest metabolic rate. Its body processes energy at a rate far below what would be expected for a mammal of its size. This extraordinarily low metabolism is both the cause and the consequence of the sloth's slow lifestyle. By burning energy very slowly, the sloth can survive on a diet of leaves, some of the least nutritious food available in the forest. And because it moves so slowly, it burns very little energy, which means its low-calorie diet is sufficient. It is a perfectly closed circle of efficiency. Eat little, burn little, need little, eat little. The sloth has found a stable equilibrium that most animals never reach, and it lives there contentedly. The sloth's body is built for hanging, not walking. Its limbs are long, its muscles relatively sparse compared to other mammals of similar size, and its skeletal structure is adapted for life suspended from branches, rather than supported by the ground. The long, curved claws, which can reach 10 centimeters or more in 3-toed sloths, act as passive hooks, requiring almost no muscular effort to maintain their grip. The tendons and ligaments of the feet and hands are arranged so that the weight of the hanging body itself tightens the grip around the branch, like a mechanical lock. A sloth can hang from a branch while completely relaxed, even while sleeping, because its grip requires no active muscle contraction to maintain. This passive grip is one of the sloth's most elegant adaptations. A sleeping sloth hanging from a branch is not working to stay there. It is simply resting, held by the geometry of its own body, while the forest goes about its business around it. Most mammals, regardless of size, from the tiny shrew to the enormous giraffe, have exactly 7 cervical vertebrae in their necks. This is one of the most consistent features of mammalian anatomy. The sloth, characteristically, is an exception. 3-toed sloths have 8 or 9 cervical vertebrae, more than any other mammal. This extra vertebra allows them to rotate their heads up to 270 degrees, far beyond the range of most animals, enabling them to look in almost any direction without moving their bodies. For an animal that spends most of its time hanging motionless from a branch, the ability to look around without moving is clearly valuable. The sloth watches the world turn around it, rotating only its head, everything else still. Despite their slow movements and sparse musculature, sloths are remarkably strong, particularly in their arms and grip. Pound for pound, the grip strength of a sloth is impressive. The same tendons and ligaments that allow passive hanging also allow sustained, powerful gripping when needed. A sloth hanging from a branch can resist being pulled away from it with considerable force. Predators attempting to dislodge a gripping sloth often find the task much more difficult than expected. In sanctuary and rehabilitation settings, workers who handle sloths note that even small individuals can grip with surprising tenacity, and that larger sloths can be genuinely difficult to dislodge once they have decided to hold on to something. The slowness masks a quiet physical power. One of the key adaptations enabling the sloth's low metabolism is a significant reduction in muscle mass. Sloths have roughly 30% less muscle mass than other mammals of similar size. This is one of the primary reasons they move so slowly. They simply have less muscular engine available to drive movement. But this reduction in muscle mass is not a deficiency. It is an adaptation. Muscle is metabolically expensive. It requires significant energy to build and maintain even at rest. By having less of it, the sloth dramatically reduces its resting energy requirements. The sloth has traded speed for economy, and in the environment it occupies, a rainforest with abundant, if low-quality, food. This trade has been enormously successful. To process the tough, fibrous, chemically defended leaves that form the core of their diet, sloths have evolved highly specialized, multi-chambered stomachs capable of very slow but thorough digestion. The digestive process in a sloth is among the slowest in the mammal kingdom. Food can spend a week or more moving through the sloth's digestive system before being fully processed. The stomach of a well-fed sloth can account for up to 30% of the animal's total body weight. The slow fermentation process that breaks down tough leaf material is carried out by a complex community of bacteria and other microorganisms living in the sloth's digestive tract. This slow digestion is another expression of the sloth's overarching metabolic strategy. Take your time, extract every possible unit of energy from whatever you consume, waste nothing. Unlike most mammals, which maintain a stable internal body temperature through active metabolic heat production, sloths allow their body temperature to fluctuate considerably with the ambient temperature of their environment, a trait called heterothermy, more commonly associated with reptiles than with mammals. On warm days, a sloth's body temperature may be relatively high. On cool nights, or in cool highland forests, it can drop significantly. This temperature flexibility reduces the energy the sloth needs to spend on thermoregulation, another facet of the same overarching efficiency strategy. This means that sloths are most active during the warmer parts of the day, when their body temperature is higher and their muscles function more effectively. On cool, overcast days, they may become even less active than usual, finding a sunny spot in the canopy and simply waiting for the warmth to return. The fur of a sloth is unlike that of any other mammal. It is long, coarse, and grows in a direction opposite to the direction of fur in most other mammals, from the belly toward the back, rather than from the back toward the belly. This reversed growth direction is an adaptation to the sloth's upside-down lifestyle, allowing rain to run off the fur more effectively when the animal is hanging from a branch. This ecosystem living in the sloth's fur is one of the more remarkable things in all of animal biology, and we will explore it in more detail later in our journey. The color of sloth fur ranges from pale grey-brown to darker brown, varying by species and individual. In animals carrying significant algae in their fur, the coat can take on a distinctive greenish tint, a form of passive camouflage that helps the sloth blend into the foliage of the canopy. The dental anatomy of sloths is unusual and highly specialized. Three-toed sloths have no incisor teeth at all. They use their hardened lips to crop leaves from branches. Two-toed sloths have vestigial canine-like teeth, but also lack true incisors. All sloths have simple, peg-like cheek teeth that lack enamel and grow continuously throughout the animal's life, a feature that compensates for the constant wear from processing tough, gritty vegetation. This simple dental system is well suited to a diet of soft leaves and occasional fruit, but it would be inadequate for animals eating harder foods. The sloth's entire digestive system, from its lips to its stomach to its intestines, is tuned specifically to its particular narrow diet. Specialization of this degree is both a strength and a vulnerability. The sloth does its particular thing extraordinarily well, but it is not easily adaptable to a different diet if its preferred food becomes unavailable. Sloths have relatively small eyes and rather poor eyesight compared to most mammals. They are thought to see in low resolution, with limited ability to perceive fine detail or fast movement. Their color vision is also limited. In an animal that moves slowly, lives in a world of dappled green light, and relies primarily on smell and touch to navigate its world, poor eyesight is not a significant handicap. The sloth does not need to spot a quickly moving prey animal. It needs to find leaves, avoid predators, and navigate between branches, all of which can be accomplished with the senses it possesses. What sloths appear to lack in visual acuity, they partially compensate for with good olfactory senses. The ability to smell and distinguish between different leaves, identifying which ones are safe and nutritious, and which ones contain toxic compounds they cannot process. A sloth, on a typical day, sleeps or rests for somewhere between 15 and 20 hours. This extraordinary amount of rest is a direct consequence of the sloth's low metabolic rate and the energy-poor nature of its diet. With very little energy to spend, the sloth spends very little. During their waking hours, sloths are not inactive. They eat, move between branches, groom themselves, and, during mating season, seek partners. But these activities are conducted at a pace so leisurely that even the waking sloth seems, to human eyes, to be only moderately more active than a sleeping one. In a world that prizes productivity and constant activity, the sloth's sleeping life can feel almost transgressive. But there is nothing wrong with a sloth that sleeps 18 hours a day. There is everything right with it. The sloth is following the deep logic of its own metabolism, as surely as any other animal follows its nature. The average movement speed of a sloth in the canopy is approximately 0.03 miles per hour, roughly 125 meters per day for a typical three-toed sloth. This makes the sloth one of the slowest moving mammals on Earth. To put this in perspective, a sloth moving at top speed travels about as fast as a very, very slow human walking. And sloths rarely, if ever, move at top speed. Their typical daily movement covers distances that a human could stride across in seconds. And yet, this slow movement is not a problem. The leaves the sloth eats are all around it. The branches it needs to navigate between are reachable with patient patience. The predators it needs to avoid are often motion-triggered hunters, for whom a very slow-moving prey item can be surprisingly difficult to detect. Slowness in the sloth's world is not a limitation. It is a strategy. Here is one of the more unexpected facts about sloths. They are capable, confident, and even relatively fast swimmers. When they need to cross a river, something that happens in flooded forests during the rainy season, or when sloths descend to move between patches of forest, they enter the water without apparent distress and swim with a reasonable degree of efficiency. In water, sloths use a kind of front crawl stroke, pulling themselves forward with their long arms. They can hold their breath for up to 40 minutes by slowing their heart rate, and they can swim at up to 4 times their land speed, making them, in the water, actually quite capable movers. The sloth swimming across a forest river, long arms pulling steadily, head held above the current, unhurried and calm, is one of the more quietly charming images the rainforest has to offer. Three-toed sloths descend from the canopy to the forest floor approximately once a week for a very specific purpose: to defecate. This weekly toilet trip is one of the more distinctive behaviors in all of mammalian biology. The sloth descends carefully from its branch to the base of the tree, digs a small hole in the leaf litter with its stubby tail, defecates into it, covers the hole, and then makes the slow and effortful climb back up into the canopy. The whole trip can take several hours and uses a significant portion of the sloth's weekly energy budget. Why do sloths do this? Why descend all the way to the ground rather than simply releasing waste from the canopy above? Scientists have proposed several explanations, which we will explore in a little more detail later. For now, it is worth simply holding the image of this weekly pilgrimage: the slow, careful descent, the brief, purposeful moment on the ground, the equally slow return, and appreciating it as one of nature's more quietly remarkable rituals. Some sloth individuals, particularly three-toed sloths, spend the majority of their entire lives in or around a single tree, or a very small cluster of trees in a small home range. Radio tracking studies have found that individual sloths sometimes remain within a few hundred meters of their original capture site for months or years. This extreme site fidelity is another expression of the sloth's energy conservation strategy. Moving between trees costs energy. If a single tree provides sufficient food and shelter, there is no advantage in going elsewhere. The familiar tree is safe, known, dependable. Its leaves are available, its predators are accounted for, its branches are well understood. Home, for a sloth, can be genuinely small: a few square meters of canopy, a handful of familiar branches, the same filtered light through the same leaves, day after day. And in that small home, there is everything needed for a long, quiet life. For an animal that moves slowly and cannot easily flee from danger, camouflage and stillness are the primary defenses. Sloths are extraordinarily good at both. Their green-tinted, mottled fur blends seamlessly with the dappled light and shadow of the forest canopy. Their stillness makes them indistinguishable from a lump of moss or a cluster of dried leaves. Even experienced field biologists, specifically looking for sloths in appropriate habitat, can spend long hours searching the canopy without finding one, only to have a guide point to an animal that has been hanging in plain sight the entire time. The combination of green-tinted camouflage and absolute stillness creates an invisibility that is, in its own quiet way, as impressive as the octopus's active color changing. The sloth does not need to change its appearance. It simply needs to remain completely, patiently still, and at that, it excels. The default posture of the sloth, the position it occupies for the vast majority of its life, is upside down. It hangs from branches by its claws, back pointed toward the ground, head and eyes facing downward or to the side, limbs draped over or wrapped around the branch above. From this upside-down position, a sloth does almost everything it needs to do. It sleeps, eats the leaves within reach of its arms, watches the forest below, and waits for the warmth of the sun through the canopy. The organs of the sloth, including the liver, stomach, and other viscera, have evolved fibrous attachments to the ribcage specifically to prevent them from pressing on the lungs while the animal hangs inverted. Without this adaptation, the weight of its own organs pressing upward against its diaphragm would make breathing difficult. With it, the upside-down position requires no more effort to maintain than our right side up position requires of us. Moving between branches in the rainforest canopy is not a straightforward task. The canopy is a complex three-dimensional landscape of interlocking branches, vines, and gaps at heights of 15 to 30 meters above the ground. A fall from those heights would be fatal. Sloths navigate this landscape with remarkable reliability, apparently relying heavily on memory and tactile sensation. They seem to have detailed spatial knowledge of the branches within their home range, knowing which branches connect, which are strong enough to hold their weight, and which paths lead to food. Research with radio-tracked sloths has shown that individuals often take the same routes through the canopy repeatedly, following specific preferred paths between resting sites and feeding areas. The sloth's world is small, and within that small world, it knows every branch. In the noisy, raucous environment of the tropical rainforest, filled with the calls of birds, frogs, monkeys, insects, and countless other animals, the sloth is, characteristically, quiet. Most sloths make little sound in normal daily life, communicating through scent markings rather than vocalizations. When sloths do vocalize, the sounds are soft and limited. Baby sloths produce a high, thin cry when distressed, a sound described as surprisingly plaintive for such a small animal. Adult three-toed sloths produce a soft, high-pitched whistle. Two-toed sloths occasionally produce a hiss when threatened. The quiet of the sloth is consistent with everything else about it. The stillness, the patience, the economy of effort. A silent animal moving very slowly through a green and noisy world is, in many ways, the most camouflaged animal of all. The passive grip mechanism of the sloth, the arrangement of tendons and ligaments that locks the claws around a branch when the body weight pulls down, is so effective that sloths have been known to remain hanging from branches even after death. Without the active muscle relaxation that would normally release the grip, the mechanical lock simply keeps functioning. This gives rise to the somewhat poignant phenomenon of a deceased sloth hanging in its familiar position in the canopy, appearing from a distance to simply be sleeping for hours or even days after death. It is both a testament to the elegance of the sloth's passive grip design and a reminder of how completely the sloth's entire body is organized around a single consistent principle: the maintenance of its position in the canopy, requiring the minimum possible expenditure of energy. The diet of the three-toed sloth consists almost entirely of leaves, a food source that is abundant in the rainforest, but nutritionally poor and often chemically defended. The sloth eats leaves slowly and selectively, using its hardened lips to crop them from branches within reach. A sloth does not typically strip a branch bare. It takes a few leaves from one spot, moves slightly, takes a few more. This selective feeding may help it avoid consuming too many of any single toxin. Many rainforest leaves contain chemical compounds that defend them against herbivores, and spreading the intake across many leaf species reduces the concentration of any single compound the digestive system must process. There is a meditative quality to watching a sloth eat. The slow reach of a long arm, the deliberate selection of a leaf, the unhurried chewing, the long pause before the next selection. It does not look like hunger. It looks like consideration. While three-toed sloths are almost exclusively folivorous, leaf eaters, two-toed sloths have a somewhat broader diet. They supplement their leaf consumption with fruits, flowers, small invertebrates such as insects, and occasionally small vertebrates or bird eggs. This dietary flexibility makes two-toed sloths slightly less nutritionally constrained than three-toed sloths, which may partly explain why two-toed sloths are generally somewhat larger and slightly more active. The difference in diet between the two sloth families, despite their similar lifestyles and habitats, is one of the more interesting examples of ecological differentiation between closely related animals sharing overlapping ranges. The forest offers multiple viable ways to be a sloth. Sloths are selective about which trees they feed in, and individual sloths develop preferences for particular species. Three-toed sloths in Costa Rica have been found to favor the leaves of cecropia trees, fast-growing pioneer trees that colonize disturbed forest edges and gaps, though they will eat the leaves of many other species as well. These preferences are not arbitrary. Different tree species offer different nutritional profiles, different toxin levels, and different leaf textures and toughness. A sloth with experience in its home range has learned, over time, which trees offer the best combination of nutrition, palatability, and safety. The sloth's knowledge of its local forest, which trees to eat from, which to avoid, which provide the best shelter, is a quietly accumulated expertise, built slowly over a long life of patient observation and experience. Despite their limited mobility, sloths contribute to the ecology of their forests in ways that extend well beyond their own lives. Their weekly defecation ritual, burying feces at the base of trees, deposits seeds from consumed fruits directly into the soil, often at locations well suited to germination. The sloth's slow digestive process means that seeds are carried some distance from the parent plant before being deposited, which can aid in dispersal beyond the parent tree's immediate canopy. For some plant species in which sloths are significant fruit consumers, this dispersal role may be ecologically meaningful. A sloth making its slow weekly journey to the forest floor is not only relieving itself, it is, in a very small and very quiet way, planting a forest. Beyond seed dispersal, the sloth's weekly defecation at the base of trees contributes to nutrient cycling in the forest ecosystem. The sloth's buried feces decompose in the soil, returning nutrients absorbed from canopy leaves to the forest floor, where they become available to the roots of trees and other plants. Some researchers have suggested that the sloth's habit of always defecating at the base of specific preferred trees may even provide those trees with a consistent, localized source of nutrients, a kind of fertilization service delivered weekly for the trees in whose canopy the sloth spends its life. If this is so, the sloth's weekly descent, so costly in energy, so apparently risky, may benefit not just the sloth through the mechanisms we'll explore later, but the trees themselves. A long, slow, quiet mutual relationship enacted once a week at the forest floor. Three-toed sloths rarely, if ever, drink water directly from pools or streams. They obtain most or all of the water they need from the leaves and fruits they consume, which have high water content, and from rainwater that collects in the hollows of leaves and along branches. A sloth will occasionally lick rainwater or dew from leaves, and may absorb some moisture through the algae and other organisms living in its fur. But the need to descend to a water source, another energy-costly trip, is largely avoided by this dietary acquisition of hydration. Once again, the pattern is the same. Minimize the need for costly actions by satisfying needs through the most efficient available means. The The sloth does not go to the water. The water, in the form of leaves, comes to the sloth. One of the most extraordinary things about the sloth, and one that deserves its own unhurried exploration, is that its fur is not merely a covering, but a habitat. A living community of organisms makes its home in the unique microenvironment of sloth fur, turning the animal into a walking, hanging ecosystem. This community includes species of algae, fungi, insects, particularly moths and beetles, mites, ticks, and other small invertebrates, many of which are found nowhere else in nature. Some of these species have co-evolved so specifically with the sloth that they are entirely dependent on it for survival. The sloth fur ecosystem is sometimes described as a miniature rainforest, a layered community of producers, the algae, consumers, the invertebrates that eat algae and fungi, and decomposers, the fungi and bacteria, all living within the few centimeters of space between the sloth's skin and the tips of its long hair. Among the most remarkable residents of the sloth fur ecosystem are the sloth moths, a group of small moths belonging to the family Chrysoginae that live exclusively in sloth fur during their larval and adult stages. Several species have been described, and new ones are still being discovered. These moths spend their adult lives in the sloth's fur, feeding on the algae and fungi that grow there. When the sloth makes its weekly descent to defecate at the base of a tree, the moths use this opportunity to lay their eggs in the fresh dung, where their larvae will develop, feeding on the decaying material before emerging as adults and flying back up to find a new sloth host. The sloth's weekly toilet trip, therefore, is not only important to the sloth's own biology, it is a critical event in the life cycle of an entire group of moth species that exist nowhere else in the world. The sloth's bathroom break is somebody else's birth event. Researchers have proposed that the relationship between the sloth and the algae in its fur may not be purely incidental. A study published in 2014 found that extracts from sloth fur algae showed anti-parasitic, antifungal, and antibacterial properties in laboratory tests, suggesting that the algae may serve a defensive role, protecting the sloth from pathogens and parasites. Beyond that, some researchers have proposed that sloths may actually consume algae from their own fur while grooming, adding a direct nutritional supplement to their otherwise limited diet. Green algae are relatively nutrient-dense compared to leaves, so even small amounts could be metabolically meaningful for an animal living at the edge of its caloric limits. If sloths do eat their own fur algae, then the relationship is mutualistic in a particularly intimate way. The sloth provides a habitat, and the algae provides food and medicine in return. A partnership conducted in slow motion across the surface of a hanging body deep in the rainforest. As algae colonize sloth fur, they give it a greenish tint that can vary from subtle to quite vivid, depending on the density of the algal growth and the lighting conditions. This green coloration helps the sloth blend into the green, leafy environment of the canopy, a form of passive, externally provided camouflage. The sloth does not produce this camouflage through any active biological process of its own. It simply provides the right conditions: a rough, grooved fur surface, adequate moisture, enough stillness for the algae to establish themselves, and the camouflage arrives on its own, courtesy of the forest. It is a beautifully passive form of concealment. The sloth does not need to change colour, as an octopus does. It simply needs to be still long enough for the forest to paint it green. Despite their considerable camouflage and stillness, sloths are not free from predation. Their main natural predators are harpy eagles, one of the largest and most powerful eagles in the world, along with jaguars and ocelots, and occasionally large anacondas. The harpy eagle is particularly well adapted to hunting sloths, with powerful, broad wings suited for maneuvering through the forest canopy, and enormous feet with curved talons capable of snatching sloths from branches. It has keen eyesight and is able to spot the subtle irregularities in the canopy that indicate a sloth's presence. Jaguars and ocelots typically encounter sloths during those rare moments when they are on the ground or when an individual descends too low in the canopy. The sloth's defense against terrestrial predators is essentially the same as its defense against aerial ones: stillness, camouflage, and the difficulty of dislodging a gripping animal. When a sloth cannot avoid a confrontation, it is capable of defending itself with its long, curved claws, which can be 10 centimeters or more in length and are surprisingly sharp. A cornered sloth may swipe with one arm toward a threatening animal, and the force and sharpness of the blow can be significant enough to deter or injure a would-be predator. Two-toed sloths, in particular, are considered the more defensive of the two groups, more likely to scratch and bite if threatened. Three-toed sloths tend toward even greater passivity, relying more completely on camouflage and stillness. But across both groups, the default defense is not action, but inaction. The sloth does not fight unless it must. It waits, hangs still, blends in, and allows its patience to do the work. Many of the predators that hunt sloths, including the harpy eagle, rely heavily on motion detection to locate prey. A large bird of prey scanning the canopy is looking for movement, a flicker of something moving against the background of leaves and branches. The sloth, moving at its characteristic near imperceptible pace, presents the minimum possible motion signal. Even when it is moving, slowly pulling one arm forward, extending to reach a distant branch, the movement may be too slow and too smooth to trigger the motion-sensitive visual systems of hunting eagles. This is the quiet genius of the sloth's slowness. By moving so little, and what movement it makes so gradual, it stays below the threshold of what predators notice. Invisibility through stillness, safety through patience. While adult sloths are well protected by their combination of camouflage, grip strength, and slow movement, young sloths, still learning the canopy, still developing their grip strength, still building their repertoire of safe routes and preferred branches, are considerably more vulnerable. Juvenile sloths ride on their mothers for the first several months of their lives, benefiting from the mother's camouflage and established position in a known, safe home range. As they begin to explore independently, they are at greatest risk. The transition from dependence to independence, those first weeks and months of navigating the canopy alone, is the most dangerous period in a sloth's life. Those that survive it successfully enter a life that can be surprisingly long. In contrast to the short lives of many small mammals, sloths are relatively long-lived animals. Wild sloths are estimated to live approximately 20 years on average, with some individuals potentially living 30 years or more. In captivity, with veterinary care and consistent food supply, even longer lifespans have been recorded. This longevity is consistent with the sloth's low metabolic rate. Animals that burn energy slowly tend, in general, to live longer. their cellular machinery operating at a lower intensity, accumulating the oxidative damage that is thought to underlie aging more slowly. A sloth that survives its vulnerable juvenile period may have 2 or 3 decades of quiet, unhurried canopy life ahead of it. Decades of slow mornings and long rests and weekly trips to the forest floor. A long, green, patient life. The gestation period of the sloth, the time from conception to birth, is relatively long compared to other mammals of similar size. 3-toed sloths carry their young for approximately 6 months. 2-toed sloths, which are larger, have gestation periods of around 11 to 12 months, comparable to that of a human. This long gestation produces a relatively well-developed offspring, a baby sloth that is born with open eyes, a full coat of fur, and functional claws, capable almost immediately of gripping its mother's fur. Long gestation periods in the sloth are consistent with the overall pattern of slow biological rhythms that characterizes every aspect of the animal's life. Grow slowly, develop carefully, take the time needed to do things properly. After birth, a baby sloth spends the first weeks and months of its life clinging to its mother's belly or chest, carried with her everywhere she goes. The baby is completely dependent on the mother for warmth, protection, and transport, gradually learning the sights, sounds, and smells of its home range. As the baby grows, it begins to reach out and explore nearby branches, while still maintaining contact with the mother, slowly building its own spatial knowledge and physical confidence. The weaning period is gradual, extending over several months. The bond between mother and infant sloth, while not characterized by the vocal and social complexity of primate mother-infant relationships, is clearly a close and important one. The mother's body is the baby's entire world for the first months of its life. Its home, its warmth, its safety. One of the most important things a young sloth must learn is which of the many leaf species in its home range are safe and nutritious to eat, and which contain toxins in quantities that its digestive system cannot handle. This knowledge is apparently passed from mother to offspring. Young sloths are thought to learn their initial dietary preferences by observing and sampling what their mothers eat during the period they spend riding on the mother. The mother's specific leaf preferences, shaped by her own experience in her particular home range, are thus transmitted to the next generation. This dietary learning means that the sloth's knowledge of its forest is, in part, inherited culturally rather than genetically, passed from individual to individual through the close bond of mother and offspring. The sloth carries its mother's forest knowledge within it, gently, for the rest of its life. Sloths have one of the lowest reproductive rates of any mammal their size. Females typically give birth to a single offspring at a time, and the interval between births is usually at least 12 to 18 months, sometimes longer. This means that a single female may produce only 1 or 2 offspring per year in the best of circumstances, and far less in average years. This low reproductive rate is another expression of the sloth's overall strategy of doing everything slowly and carefully. Each offspring receives extended maternal care and a long, gradual introduction to independent life. The investment in each individual is high, even if the number of individuals produced is low. For sloths living in stable, healthy forest, this slow reproductive rate is sustainable, each individual's long life compensating for the low rate of reproduction. But when sloths face habitat loss or other threats, their slow reproduction makes population recovery very difficult. The specific home range of an individual sloth, the particular trees, roots, and resting sites it will use throughout its life, appears to be established in large part during the period spent with the mother. As a young sloth accompanies its mother through her territory, it is building a detailed mental map of the roots, trees, and resources that will guide its own independent life. When the young sloth finally separates from its mother, it typically establishes a home range that overlaps with or is adjacent to the mother's, rather than dispersing far away. This spatial continuity between generations helps maintain the accumulated local ecological knowledge of a sloth lineage over time. The forest, to a young sloth, is first known through its mother's movements, the branches she chooses, the trees she favors, the paths she takes through the canopy. It is the most intimate possible introduction to a world. We visited the sloth's remarkable weekly toilet trip earlier, but it deserves a more careful look. Climbing down from the canopy and back up again is one of the most energetically costly things a sloth does. Researchers have estimated that this weekly descent uses approximately 8% of the sloth's daily energy budget, a significant expenditure for an animal living at the margin of its caloric intake. Given this cost, the persistence of this behavior across sloth species, and across millions of years of evolution, implies a correspondingly significant benefit. Natural selection does not maintain costly behaviors without good reasons. The question of why sloths descend to defecate has occupied researchers for decades. Several hypotheses have been proposed, each with some supporting evidence, and the complete answer may involve several of them simultaneously. One compelling hypothesis, proposed by researchers Jonathan Pauly and Zachary Peary, links the sloth's weekly descent directly to its relationship with the sloth moths that live in its fur. As we noted earlier, sloth moths use the sloth's descent to lay their eggs in fresh dung. More moths in the fur means more moth carcasses decomposing there, which means more nitrogen and other nutrients available for the algae to consume, which means more algae growing in the fur. If more algae in the fur means better camouflage or better nutrition for the sloth through grooming, then the sloth that descends to defecate, maintaining its moth population, may have better survival and nutrition outcomes than one that defecates from the canopy, where moths cannot access the dung. In this interpretation, the sloth's weekly toilet trip is the keystone of a multi-species mutualistic relationship. The sloth, the moth, and the algae bound together in a slow, green, quietly remarkable interdependence. Another hypothesis proposes that defecating at the base of trees serves as a form of chemical communication, a scent signal that advertises the sloth's presence and reproductive status to potential mates in the vicinity. By depositing scent at a prominent location at ground level, a sloth may be communicating to other sloths in the area. Since sloths are difficult to detect visually and rarely vocalize, chemical communication through scent marks may be one of the primary ways they maintain awareness of each other's presence and reproductive status within a shared area of forest. The weekly descent, in this interpretation, is less a bathroom trip and more a social announcement, a brief, quiet advertisement broadcast to the forest floor. I am here, I am well, I am available. Whatever the benefits of the weekly descent, there is no question that it carries significant risks. The forest floor is the most dangerous environment a sloth ever occupies. On the ground, the sloth is at its most exposed. Visible, slow, unable to escape upward quickly if a predator approaches. Many of the predation events recorded for sloths occur during these descents, or immediately upon return to the base of the tree. Jaguars and ocelots, which hunt primarily on the ground, find sloths most accessible during these brief terrestrial interludes. And yet, the behavior persists across millions of years, across multiple species, against the consistent pressure of predation. The benefits must be real, and they must be substantial. Whatever happens on that weekly trip to the forest floor, it is worth the risk. The sloth's patient evolution has determined this, one generation at a time. Related to the weekly defecation schedule, sloths have remarkable capacity to retain waste products for extended periods. The sloth's feces and urine, when finally released on the weekly descent, can represent up to a third of the animal's entire body weight, an extraordinary accumulation. This retention capacity requires significant physiological tolerance for the biochemical products of metabolic waste, which in most animals would become toxic if retained for as long as the sloth retains them. How the sloth manages this without apparent ill effects is not entirely understood. It may be related to the generally low metabolic rate and the low rate of waste production. The sloth simply produces waste so slowly that even extended retention does not accumulate to harmful levels. Once again, the sloth's biology surprises us with a solution that follows its own quiet, slow, internal logic. The 6 living species of sloth are all confined to the neotropical region, the humid tropical and subtropical forests of Central America and South America. Their range extends from Honduras in the north through Panama and into South America, reaching as far south as northern Argentina. Within this range, different species occupy somewhat different zones. 3-toed sloths tend to prefer lowland tropical rainforest, while some 2-toed sloths also inhabit secondary forest, cloud forest, and forest edge habitats. The pygmy 3-toed sloth is confined, as we noted, to a single small island off the coast of Panama. The rainforests of Central and South America are among the most biodiverse ecosystems on Earth, and the sloth is woven into these ecosystems in ways both direct and indirect. As a consumer of leaves, a disperser of seeds, a host of unique organisms, and a link in the food chains that sustain the forest's larger predators. The primary threat facing all sloth species today is the destruction of their forest habitat. Central and South American rainforests have been cleared for agriculture, cattle ranching, logging, and urban development at alarming rates over the past century, and the process continues. Sloths are poorly suited to surviving in fragmented or degraded forest. Their limited mobility means they cannot easily move between isolated forest patches. Their specific dietary requirements mean that small forest fragments, lacking their preferred tree species, cannot support them, and their slow reproduction means that populations reduced by habitat loss recover very slowly, if at all. In regions where the forest has been heavily fragmented, sloths often end up isolated in small remnant patches of trees, unable to reach other patches, slowly declining as their food supply diminishes and their genetic isolation increases. In areas where forest has been cleared and replaced by agriculture or human settlement, sloths sometimes attempt to cross open areas by traveling along power lines, mistaking them for vines or branches. Contact with live electrical wires is, of course, lethal. Electrocution on power lines has become one of the more significant human-caused sources of sloth mortality in parts of Costa Rica, Panama, and Brazil, where settlements and agricultural land have fragmented forest habitats. Wildlife rescue organizations in these countries respond to many such incidents each year. Some power companies and conservation organizations have collaborated to install wildlife crossings, rope bridges over roads and cleared areas that allow sloths and other arboreal animals to move between forest fragments without descending to the dangerous ground or attempting the fatal power lines. These simple, inexpensive structures have been shown to be effective and are one of the more encouraging conservation interventions in sloth-inhabited regions. In response to the growing number of sloths injured by human activity, electrocution, road collisions, dog attacks during ground descents, and orphaning when mothers are killed, a network of wildlife sanctuaries and rehabilitation centers has developed across Costa Rica, Panama, and other countries. These centers receive injured and orphaned sloths, provide veterinary care and nutritional support, and where possible, rehabilitate animals for return to wild forest. Raising orphaned baby sloths is particularly complex, requiring careful dietary management, appropriate social contact to prevent imprinting on humans, and gradual introduction to the physical and sensory environment of the canopy. The dedication of the people who run these centers, caring for animals that cannot express gratitude, working toward the return of each individual to a forest that is itself under pressure, is one of the quieter heroisms of modern conservation. One of the challenges of keeping sloths in captivity is their tendency toward heterothermy, their inability to fully regulate their body temperature independently of ambient conditions. In environments that are too cold, sloths may become lethargic, stop eating, and decline in health. In environments that are too warm, they may overheat. Maintaining appropriate temperature, humidity, and light conditions in captivity requires careful attention and specialized facilities. Many institutions that have attempted to keep sloths, including major zoological parks, have found them challenging animals to maintain in long-term health. This difficulty is, in a sense, a reflection of how completely the sloth is adapted to its specific environment. Remove it from the warm, humid, green canopy of the tropical rainforest, and the precise physiological calibrations that make it so effective there begin to fail. While we must be careful about projecting human emotions onto animals with very different nervous systems, behavioral research and observational data from sloth sanctuaries suggest that sloths experience something that might loosely be described as contentment, a baseline positive state associated with comfortable physical conditions. Sloths at rest in comfortable, warm, well-fed conditions show relaxed body posture, slow and regular breathing, and reduced responsiveness to mild stimuli, a profile consistent with physiological calm. When placed in uncomfortable conditions, too cold, too exposed, unfamiliar environments, their behavior changes in ways consistent with stress or discomfort. Whether sloths experience anything like subjective happiness or suffering in the way mammals with larger, more complex brains do is genuinely uncertain. But they do respond to their conditions in ways that suggest physical and perhaps emotional states. And a sloth hanging comfortably in a warm, sun-dappled tree, belly full, familiar branches all around. It seems reasonable to suppose that this, for a sloth, is something like well-being. Radio tracking studies and behavioral observations suggest that sloths show preference for familiar areas within their home range, returning to specific resting sites repeatedly and following familiar routes through the canopy. When placed in unfamiliar environments, sloths show increased movement and exploratory behavior before settling. This suggests at least a functional form of spatial memory, the ability to recognize and preferentially return to familiar locations. Whether this is experienced as anything like the comfort of home in the human sense is impossible to say with certainty, but the behavioral pattern is consistent with that interpretation. A sloth returning to a familiar branch, the particular angle of it, the particular quality of light through these particular leaves, the familiar smell of this particular tree is going somewhere it knows, somewhere it has been before, somewhere that, in whatever way a sloth knows such things, is safe. Like most mammals, sloths are believed to experience sleep stages, including a phase analogous to REM sleep, during which dreaming is thought to occur in humans and other mammals. The neurological basis for this inference is the observation that sloths, like other mammals, show signs of cyclically varying brain activity during sleep. What a sloth might dream about, the warm canopy, the particular texture of a favoured branch, the slow reach toward a cluster of leaves, is a question that has no answer and perhaps never will. But the possibility that this slow, quiet animal has a private nocturnal life of images and sensations, drifting through its own long sleep hours, is somehow a quietly beautiful one. People who work closely with sloths in sanctuary and rehabilitation settings frequently describe the animals as appearing relaxed when held in comfortable, supported positions that mimic their natural hanging posture. Baby sloths in particular will often settle into a calm, quiet state when held against the chest of a caregiver, apparently responding to the warmth and physical support. Interpreting these observations must be done carefully. What appears as contentment may be a stress response, or torpor, or simply a behavioral strategy of freezing in the presence of a large unknown animal. But experienced caretakers who know individual animals over long periods often distinguish between these states and describe genuine relaxation in comfortable, familiar interactions. The sloth, patient and warm, resting against a chest. It is one of the gentler images in the world of human-animal interaction. It is worth spending a moment on a common misconception, that sloths are unintelligent because they are slow. The two things are not related. The sloth's slowness is a metabolic strategy, not a cognitive one. Its brain, while not as large as a primate's, is perfectly suited to the tasks the sloth needs to perform. Sloths navigate complex three-dimensional environments with consistent reliability. They remember the specific trees, roots, and resources of their home range with apparent precision. They learn which leaf species are safe to eat and pass this knowledge to their offspring. They time their weekly descents to the base of specific trees. They respond flexibly to predators and environmental changes. These are not the behaviors of a simple animal operating on pure instinct. The sloth thinks, in its own slow way, about its own world. It simply does not need to think about most of the things we think about. And in the economy of its thought, as in the economy of its metabolism, there is a quiet sufficiency that deserves respect. For the indigenous peoples of the Amazon basin and other regions where sloths live, these animals have been known, named, and woven into cultural life for thousands of years. Many indigenous cultures across the Amazon, the Orinoco, and Central America have specific names for sloths and specific cultural associations with them. In some traditions, the sloth appears as a figure of wisdom, an animal that has learned the art of stillness and patience. In others, it is associated with the spirits of certain trees, or with the forest's quiet interior life. In still others, it is simply a familiar, named presence in the forest around the village, recognized, understood, respected. The Western world's tendency to frame the sloth primarily through the lens of laziness or humor reflects a specific cultural perspective, one that is not universal. For the people who have lived alongside sloths for generations, these animals are simply part of the complex, known world of the forest. In recent decades, the sloth has been adopted, somewhat playfully, as a symbol of the slow living movement, a cultural response to the pressures of fast-paced modern life that advocates for greater emphasis on rest, reflection, deliberate pace, and presence in daily experience. Sloth imagery appears on mugs, t-shirts, phone cases, calendars, and social media accounts dedicated to the virtues of doing things slowly and resting without guilt. The sloth's serene, round face and apparently permanent gentle smile have made it a natural mascot for anyone who has ever felt that the world moves a little too fast. There is something both funny and genuinely meaningful in this adoption. The sloth does, in its biological reality, embody a kind of radical acceptance of slowness. It does not resist its own metabolism. It does not strive to be faster. It lives fully within its own pace, and in doing so, it thrives. Perhaps there is a lesson in that, offered gently, without any drama, from the canopy. Evidence of sloths in pre-Columbian artistic traditions in Central and South America exists in various forms: ceramic figures, rock carvings, and decorative motifs from multiple cultures across the region. These representations, while stylized and sometimes difficult to identify with certainty, suggest that the sloth was a recognized and culturally meaningful animal in many pre-Columbian societies. The durability of these representations across different cultures and time periods speaks to the sloth's consistent presence in the lives and imaginations of the people who shared its forest. An animal that is regularly represented in art is an animal that captures attention, provokes thought, and carries cultural meaning. When European naturalists first encountered sloths in the 16th and 17th centuries, their descriptions were frequently unflattering and often inaccurate. Many early accounts emphasize the animal's slowness as a kind of pathology, a physical deficiency rather than an adaptation. Some described sloths as among the most wretched of nature's creations, suggesting that the animal had been given the minimum of everything needed to sustain life. These accounts tell us more about European attitudes towards slowness, productivity, and the purpose of animals than they do about sloths. The assumption that an animal should be fast, vigorous, and active, and that an animal lacking these qualities was somehow deficient, was an entirely culturally specific judgment applied to a creature operating by entirely different principles. Modern biology has thoroughly revised this view. The sloth is not deficient. It is extraordinarily well adapted. The Europeans who first described it simply did not yet have the conceptual framework to understand what they were seeing. In parts of Central and South America, sloths have historically been kept as pets, and there continues to be a small illegal trade in wild-caught sloths for the exotic pet market. This practice is harmful to sloth populations and to the individual animals involved. Sloths are highly specialized to their specific forest environment and do poorly in domestic settings. Sloths kept as pets suffer from inappropriate diet, incorrect temperature and humidity conditions, inadequate physical environment, and the stress of an unfamiliar social context. Many captive pet sloths die within months or years of capture. The animal's apparent gentleness and calm demeanor, which make them seem like potentially good pets, are in fact signs of stress and torpor in a mismatched environment. Conservation organizations and veterinary associations universally discourage the keeping of sloths as pets and advocate strongly for the protection of wild sloth populations in their natural habitat. For much of the 20th century, sloths were surprisingly understudied, despite being relatively accessible animals in accessible habitats. Their slow, cryptic lifestyle made them difficult to find and observe in the wild, and their physiological peculiarities made them challenging to study in captivity. In recent decades, advances in radio tracking technology, non-invasive sampling methods, and field research techniques have enabled a significant expansion of sloth research. GPS collars have revealed the details of sloth movement and home range use. Genetic sampling from hair and feces has enabled population studies without capturing animals. Detailed physiological measurements have clarified the mechanisms of sloth metabolism and thermoregulation. As a result, our scientific understanding of sloths has expanded enormously in a relatively short period of time. Many of the facts in this script, the details of the sloth fur ecosystem, the role of RNA editing, the specific cost of the weekly descent, are the products of research conducted in the past 20 years. Earlier estimates of sloth sleep duration, derived from observations of captive animals, suggested that sloths slept up to 20 hours a day, spending approximately 80% of their lives asleep. This figure became widely repeated and contributed significantly to the sloth's popular image as an almost incomprehensibly dormant animal. More recent research using EEG monitoring of brain activity in wild free-ranging sloths found lower estimates, averaging approximately 9 to 10 hours of sleep per day, rather than 15 to 20. This is still well above the mammalian average, but considerably less than the earlier estimates suggested. The discrepancy likely reflects the difference between captive and wild conditions. Captive sloths, with no need to move in search of food and no stimulation from the complex environment of the forest, may sleep more than wild ones. Wild sloths, navigating their home ranges and responding to the varied stimuli of the forest, appear to be more wakeful than previously thought. Even the science of sloth sleep has required patient revision. The community of microorganisms living in the sloth's gut, its microbiome, has become an area of growing scientific interest. The sloth's highly specialized digestive system, with its slow fermenting multi-chambered stomach and long residence times, supports a distinctive microbial community adapted to the chemical environment of sloth digestion. Research into the sloth gut microbiome is in its early stages, but initial findings suggest significant differences from the gut microbiomes of other herbivorous mammals. Differences that may reflect the sloth's unique diet, its slow gut transit times, and perhaps its long evolutionary isolation. Understanding the sloth microbiome may also have practical implications. Microorganisms from unusual and extreme environments are sometimes sources of novel enzymes or biochemical pathways, with potential applications in medicine or biotechnology. the bacteria in a sloth's stomach, slowly, patiently doing their quiet work, may one day contribute to human health in ways we cannot yet predict. The sloth's extraordinary metabolic efficiency has attracted interest from researchers studying the biology of energy use in mammals. Understanding how the sloth manages to survive and function on such a low caloric intake, and what physiological mechanisms enable this, may offer insights into metabolic flexibility and energy conservation with potential relevance to human health and medicine. Research on sloth thermoregulation, muscle biochemistry, and digestive physiology has contributed to broader discussions of metabolic flexibility, hypothermia tolerance, and the physiological limits of mammalian energy conservation. The sloth, studied in the lab and in the field, is not just a curiosity. It is a natural experiment in energy biology, one that has been running continuously for 50 million years, with outcomes that are relevant to understanding life's relationship with energy at its most fundamental level. The pygmy three-toed sloth, Bradypus pygmaeus, the smallest of all living sloths, found only on the island of Isla Escudo de Veraguas off the Caribbean coast of Panama, was only formally described as a distinct species in 2001. Before that, the small sloths on this island were assumed to be a population of the more widespread brown-throated three-toed sloth. Detailed morphological and genetic analysis established that the island population was in fact a distinct species, smaller than its mainland relative, with several anatomical differences consistent with its island isolation over approximately 9,000 years, since the island became separated from the mainland at the end of the last ice age. The pygmy sloth is critically endangered, with its entire global population confined to one small island of approximately 4.5 square kilometers. It is a species that barely exists, a whisper of a population, a fragile living thread connecting to a much older evolutionary lineage. Most mammals shiver when cold, a rapid, involuntary muscle contraction that generates body heat through the mechanical energy of movement. Sloths, characteristically, do not shiver. Their muscles are too sparse, and their metabolic commitment to energy conservation too complete to support this energetically costly thermoregulatory response. Instead of shivering, sloths respond to cold by seeking warmer microhabitats, moving to sunlit branches, pressing their bodies against sun-warmed bark, or simply becoming more torpid and waiting for the temperature to rise. No shivering, no hurrying. Even in response to cold, the sloth's answer is stillness and patience. The same answer it gives to almost every challenge the forest presents. Despite their general quietness, sloths do sneeze. And when they do, it is an event of some contrast to their usual stillness. The sneeze, which functions as it does in other mammals to clear the nasal passages, produces one of the louder sounds a sloth typically makes. In an animal that rarely vocalizes and almost never moves quickly, a sneeze has a startling quality for any observer nearby. It is, in some small way, a reminder that the stillness is not total, that within the quiet, motionless body, the business of being alive continues, with occasional, brief, involuntary interruptions. Like their eyesight, the hearing of sloths is generally considered to be limited. Their ears are small and not particularly well adapted for detecting faint sounds or determining the precise direction of sounds. They are not, in any sense, sound-dependent animals. Their primary sensory reliance appears to be on smell. The chemical world of the forest, the scent of specific leaves, the olfactory signals left by other sloths on branches and trees. A sloth navigating its world is navigating largely by smell, supplemented by the tactile memory of familiar branches and the limited visual information its small eyes provide. In the sensory world of the sloth, the forest is a place of smells and textures more than sights and sounds, an interior landscape quite different from our own. We mentioned earlier that sloths are good swimmers. Part of what makes swimming relatively easy for them is that they float readily. Their multi-chambered stomach, when full of gas produced by fermentation, is highly buoyant, giving the sloth a natural flotation aid. This buoyancy means that when a sloth enters water, it does not immediately struggle to stay on the surface. It floats, extends its long arms in the slow front crawl stroke, and moves forward with relatively little effort. For an animal that can slow its heart rate to less than a third of its normal resting rate while in the water, holding breath for extended periods, the river crossing that might look impossible becomes entirely manageable. The sloth, once again, has a quiet answer to a seemingly difficult problem. Observations of wild sloths suggest increased movement and activity during and immediately after rainfall. Rain may stimulate increased movement in several ways. The washing away of chemical signals may require refreshing scent marks. The post-rain abundance of fresh, wet leaves may offer improved foraging conditions, and the cooler, wetter conditions may suit the sloth's thermoregulatory preferences. In the rainforest, rain is not an interruption to normal activity, but a regular, structuring feature of daily life. The sloth, like all forest creatures, has calibrated its behavior to the rhythms of rain and dry, cloud and sun, morning cool and afternoon warmth. The image of a sloth, roused by rain, moving a little more purposefully through the wet canopy, leaves dripping, fur glistening, headed somewhere specific in the after-rain freshness, is one of the more vivid small portraits of sloth life that field observation has provided. The claws of the three-toed sloth are slightly asymmetric, differing somewhat in length and curvature between individuals and between the different positions on each foot. This asymmetry, slight as it is, may help with grip diversity, allowing the claws to engage branches at different angles more effectively than perfectly uniform claws would. In two-toed sloths, the front feet have two large claws, giving the family its name, while the back feet retain three, giving the animal a different grip geometry at each end. This variation in grip structure between front and rear may contribute to stability while hanging. Different grip types at each end of the body, creating a more secure overall hold. Even in the details of the sloth's claws, in those few centimeters of curved keratin, there is the same quiet efficiency that characterizes every aspect of the sloth's biology. Given that sloths live in the canopy at heights of 15 to 30 meters, falls are an occupational hazard. And indeed, falls do occur, particularly in juvenile animals still learning the canopy, or in adults weakened by illness or injury. Remarkably, sloths appear to survive falls with some regularity. Their low body weight relative to their surface area, their flexible musculature, and, some researchers suggest, a natural tendency to relax completely during a fall, reducing the impact compared to a tensed body, all contribute to a degree of fall tolerance. In rehabilitation centers, workers not infrequently receive sloths that have survived falls from considerable heights with relatively minor injuries. The sloth, even in misfortune, has adapted its body to manage what the forest throws at it. While the giant ground sloths we met at the beginning of our journey are long extinct, the tree-dwelling lifestyle of the modern sloth is an ancient one. Fossil evidence suggests that arboreal sloths, sloth ancestors that lived in trees in the same way modern sloths do, have existed for at least 10 million years. This means that the basic sloth template, the long arms, the passive grip, the slow metabolism, the upside-down life in the canopy, has been tested and refined against the conditions of the South American rainforest for 10 million years. 10 million years of tropical mornings and rainy afternoons and patient, slow movement through the green canopy. Whatever the sloth is doing, it has been working for a very long time. The term ecosystem engineer is usually applied to animals like beavers, which actively reshape their environment through their activities. The sloth is a more subtle kind of engineer. Its influence on its environment gentle and distributed rather than dramatic. Through its leaf consumption, it slightly shapes the growth of the trees it prefers. Through its defecation at tree bases, it contributes to soil nutrient distribution. Through its role as a habitat for moths, algae, fungi, and invertebrates, it maintains a unique biological community that would not exist without it. Through its role as prey, it sustains the populations of the eagles and cats that hunt it. Remove the sloths from a forest, and the forest changes. Not dramatically, perhaps not obviously at first, but in the quiet accumulation of ecological changes that follows the removal of any long-evolved piece of a complex system. Because sloths are closely tied to the quality and structure of their forest habitat, requiring specific tree species, continuous canopy, and sufficient area for their home ranges. Their presence and population health is sometimes used as an indicator of overall forest condition. A forest with a healthy sloth population is, in general, a forest with sufficient area, sufficient tree diversity, and sufficient structural complexity to support its full range of species. A forest from which sloths have disappeared may be sending an early signal that habitat quality has declined beyond the point of supporting its most specialized residents. In this way, the quiet, slow, green sloth, hanging in its tree, going about its patient life, is also, without knowing it, a living measure of the health of the forest around it. The anatomy of the sloth's face, the rounded features, the slightly upturned corners of the mouth, the large, soft eyes, creates what appears to humans as a permanent, gentle smile. This sloth smile, as it is sometimes called, has contributed enormously to the animal's popularity and to the outpouring of affection directed toward it in popular culture. Of course, the smile is not intentional or expressive in the way a human smile is. It is simply the consequence of the arrangement of facial muscles and the shape of the sloth's muzzle. The sloth is not, as far as we know, perpetually happy. It is simply perpetually structured in a way that looks, to our pattern-recognizing human visual system, like a smile. But there is something delightful about this coincidence. In an animal that is gentle, slow, and harmless, nature has placed a face that looks like contentment. Whether by coincidence or by some deeper resonance, the sloth looks the way it seems to live, peacefully. The relationship between the harpy eagle and the sloth, predator and prey, hunter and hunted, has been ongoing for millions of years. Over this time, the two have shaped each other. The sloth's camouflage and slowness are, in part, a response to predation pressure from eagles and other aerial hunters. The harpy eagle's power and canopy navigating wings are, in part, adaptations to hunting the sloths and monkeys of the canopy. This long, mutual, evolutionary conversation, conducted not in words, but in anatomy and behavior over millions of years, is one of the quiet stories underlying the apparent simplicity of a predator eating its prey. Every feature of the sloth's defense is an answer to a question the harpy eagle has been asking. Every feature of the eagle's predatory ability is an answer to the sloth's quiet attempt to be invisible. A resting sloth sometimes hangs from a single limb, one arm or leg extended to grip a branch, the rest of the body dangling freely. This position, which looks to human eyes almost impossibly precarious, is perfectly safe for the sloth, whose passive grip mechanism requires no muscle effort to maintain. Hanging from a single limb may help a sloth maximize sun exposure on cool mornings, or reduce surface contact with a wet branch, or simply represent the most comfortable position given the geometry of a particular branch. Whatever the reason, the sight of a sloth hanging from one arm, completely relaxed, body swaying slightly in the forest breeze, is one of the more memorable images the rainforest has to offer. Baby sloths, when separated from their mothers, or when cold or frightened, produce a small, high-pitched vocalization that sounds approximately like "ah," thin, plaintive, and surprisingly penetrating for such a small animal. In rehabilitation settings, workers learn to recognize this sound as an indicator that a baby needs warmth and contact or reassurance. It is one of the primary ways the infant communicates its needs. The sound itself, that small, reedy cry in the warm air of the rainforest, is the most direct expression of need and feeling the sloth produces. Small and soft as it is, it carries clearly. The forest hears it. The mother nearby hears it. And in the sanctuary, the caretaker hears it and comes. Consistent with their low metabolic rate, sloths have very slow heart rates. A resting three-toed sloth may have a heart rate of just 40 to 60 beats per minute, roughly half the resting rate of most mammals of similar size. During torpor or in cold conditions, the heart rate can fall even lower. In water, as we mentioned, sloths can slow their heart rate dramatically as a breath-holding adaptation. The heart, like everything else in the sloth, operates at the minimum rate compatible with proper function, conserving energy with every slow beat. There is something deeply calming about the thought of that slow, steady heart, beating unhurriedly in the warm body of a hanging sloth, counting out the long hours of the rainforest afternoon at its own quiet pace. Research has found that sloths show a degree of resistance to the venoms of some snake species, including some pit vipers that coexist with them in the rainforest. The exact mechanisms underlying this resistance are not fully understood, but it may be related to the unusual biochemistry of sloth physiology. The same slow metabolic processes that make the sloth unusual in so many other ways. Whether this venom resistance is a specific adaptation to life in an environment containing venomous snakes or a byproduct of other physiological features is uncertain. But it adds another quiet dimension to the sloth's suite of adaptations. A body that is resilient in ways that extend beyond what is immediately obvious. The sloth's nearest living relatives are the anteaters, with whom they share the order Pilosa. More distantly, both sloths and anteaters are related to armadillos. Together, these three groups form a larger superorder called Cenathra. which is entirely native to the Americas. These three groups, the patient sloth, the industrious anteater, the armored armadillo, represent three very different solutions to life in the American tropics and subtropics, all descended from common ancestors in South America's long period of continental isolation. Each one distinctive, each one successful, each one quietly extraordinary in its own way. While most sloths are associated with lowland tropical rainforest, some species have been found at surprisingly high altitudes. In the cloud forests of the Andes and the highlands of Costa Rica and Panama, sloths have been recorded at elevations of over 2,000 meters, considerably higher than might be expected for a thermoregulatory challenged tropical specialist. How sloths manage the cooler temperatures and different vegetation of cloud forest environments is not entirely clear, but their occurrence at these altitudes speaks to a degree of environmental tolerance beyond what their physiological vulnerabilities might suggest. The sloth in cloud forest, wrapped in swirling mist, perched in a moss-covered tree, the valley invisible below, is a slightly different portrait than the familiar lowland canopy image, but no less peaceful for that. In some parts of Central America, sloths have been found occupying shade-grown cacao plantations, agricultural areas where cacao trees are grown beneath a canopy of taller shade trees that mimic, to some degree, the structure of natural forest. This finding is significant for conservation because it suggests that sloths can, in some circumstances, persist in carefully managed agricultural landscapes rather than requiring strictly pristine forest. Shade-grown agriculture that maintains some canopy structure may be able to support sloth populations alongside other forest species. It is a small piece of cautiously optimistic news in a conservation context that contains many difficult realities. A small reminder that the sloth, with its patient adaptability, sometimes finds a way. The sloth's passive grip mechanism, the tendon lock system that maintains grip without muscular effort, has attracted interest from engineers and biomechanics researchers working on the design of passive gripping devices and robotic hands. A device that can grip reliably without continuous power consumption would be valuable in many contexts. Surgical robotics, prosthetic hands, climbing robots, and other applications where energy efficiency is important. The sloth's solution to this problem, achieved through the specific geometry of tendon routing around the joints of the fingers, provides a biological model that engineers are actively studying. The sloth, again, as teacher, quietly offering its solutions to the world's problems from the green heights of the canopy. The maned sloth, Bradypus torquatus, a three-toed sloth found only in the Atlantic forest of southeastern Brazil, is one of the rarest and most threatened of all sloth species. It is distinguished from other three-toed sloths by the long black hair around its neck and shoulders that gives it a mane-like appearance. The Atlantic forest of Brazil is one of the most degraded tropical forests on Earth. Once covering approximately 15% of Brazil's territory, it has been reduced to less than 12% of its original extent, fragmented into thousands of isolated patches. The maned sloth, entirely dependent on this forest, has declined accordingly. It exists now in remnant patches of a once great forest, making its slow way through the fragments, a creature of the edge living in a world that has been reduced around it without its knowledge or consent. In parts of Costa Rica, Panama, and Brazil, sloths have adapted to living in close proximity to human settlements, occupying the trees of gardens, parks, and roadside plantings where natural forest has been replaced. These urban and peri-urban sloths face unique challenges: traffic, dogs, power lines, and the stress of human noise and activity. But some individuals persist in these environments for extended periods. These human-adjacent sloths are often the most frequently seen and photographed individuals. The ones who turn up in garden trees, who are rescued from roads, who are photographed by tourists. They represent the intersection of the sloth's world and ours, and they carry with them all the fragility and resilience of a wild animal trying to persist in a changed world. Among the many qualities that make sloths the subjects of widespread human affection, their consistent non-aggression toward people is notable. Sloths do not attack humans, do not display threat behaviors in most encounters, and will, when approached, typically simply turn their heads slowly to regard the approaching person and then look away. This extreme non-aggression is consistent with the sloth's overall behavioral economy. Fighting or fleeing costs energy. And since humans are not natural predators of sloths, and sloths have no evolutionary history calibrated to human presence, the sloth has no particular program for responding to us with aggression. We can look at sloths. We can sit near them. We can, when working in rehabilitation contexts, hold them. And in most circumstances, the sloth will regard us with the same calm, slow gaze it turns on everything, the same patient, unhurried attention it gives to the world. We mentioned earlier that the grooved structure of sloth hair provides habitat for algae. The grooves run along the length of each hair shaft, not found in any other mammal's fur, creating a capillary-like surface that retains moisture and provides anchoring points for algal and fungal spores. Scanning electron microscope images of sloth hair show these grooves clearly, a fine, regular texture running the full length of each hair, giving the hair a striated appearance under magnification. In cross-section, the hair is roughly oval with a corrugated surface. This unique hair structure is thought to be a specific adaptation for hosting the algal community, something that evolved in concert with the ecological relationships between the sloth, its fur microbiome, and the forest that shaped both. The sloth's hair grew these grooves for reasons that extend beyond the individual sloth, grown for the benefit of the whole small community that lives within it. We noted earlier that wild sloths are estimated to live 20 to 30 years. In captivity, with consistent food supply, veterinary care, and protection from predators, some sloths have lived considerably longer. The record longevity for a captive sloth is held by Paula, a Hoffman's two-toed sloth at a wildlife refuge in Costa Rica, who lived to over 40 years of age. Paula became something of a celebrity in sloth conservation circles, a living symbol of the potential longevity of her species, and a subject of considerable research interest. A 40-year-old sloth, having hung through 4 decades of tropical mornings and rainforest afternoons, is carrying within it a depth of environmental experience and accumulated learning that we can only partially imagine. In its long, slow way, it has seen much. In some sloth species, females are slightly larger than males, a pattern of sexual dimorphism, difference in size between the sexes. That is the reverse of the more common mammalian pattern, in which males tend to be larger. This female larger pattern, when it occurs, is sometimes associated with the demands of reproduction. Larger body size, providing greater resources for gestation and lactation. In other sloth species, the size difference between sexes is minimal or absent. The variation in size between species and sexes is one of the smaller details of sloth biology, but it is a reminder that even among closely related animals, the details of life history and reproduction create their own gentle variations. Recent research has raised the intriguing possibility that sloths, like some other animals, may use the Earth's magnetic field as a navigational aid. Evidence for magnetoreception, the ability to sense magnetic fields, has been found in a growing number of mammals, and researchers studying sloth navigation have not excluded this possibility. How sloths navigate their home ranges with sufficient precision to return reliably to specific resting sites, specific feeding trees, and specific defecation sites remains not fully understood. Spatial memory certainly plays a role. Whether magnetic field sensing contributes remains an open question. One of the many quiet mysteries that sloth biology still holds. Because of their appealing appearance and their status as symbols of a threatened biome, sloths are frequently used as ambassador species in conservation campaigns focused on the protection of Central and South American rainforests. Their image appears on fundraising materials, educational programs, and social media campaigns for rainforest conservation across many countries. This ambassadorial role is imperfect. No single species can fully represent the complexity and value of an entire ecosystem, but it is effective. The sloth's popularity generates attention and resources for conservation programs that benefit not just sloths, but the thousands of other species that share their forest. The sloth, doing nothing in particular except hanging quietly in its tree, turns out to be one of the more effective advocates for the forest it inhabits. Merely by existing and by being the kind of animal it is, it draws human attention and care toward the world it represents. While the classic image of a sleeping sloth is of an animal hanging from a branch, sloths actually sleep in a variety of positions, depending on the available support structures. They may sleep while hugging the trunk of a tree with both arms and legs, curled in the fork of a branch, draped over a large branch with limbs hanging on either side, or hanging freely from a single limb. The choice of sleeping position appears to depend on the ambient temperature, the structure of the available branches, and perhaps individual preference. Sloths in cooler weather tend to sleep in more curled, compact positions, minimizing exposed surface area. In warmer weather, they may spread out more, maximizing air circulation around the body. Each sleeping sloth arranges itself within the unique geometry of its particular tree, in the particular light of its particular morning, in whatever position the convergence of branch structure, temperature, and the sloth's own comfort leads it to, each one finding its own way to rest. We have traveled through 100 facts on this long, gentle night, through 50 million years of evolution and the quiet daily rhythms of the rainforest canopy, through the mechanics of passive grip and the mystery of the fur microbiome, through the weekly toilet trip and the long, devoted brooding of a mother by her eggs, through the ancient bones of giants and the fragile present of the pygmy sloth on its small island. And perhaps the most fitting final thought is this: every sloth is not merely in its forest. Every sloth carries its forest within it. In the algae in its fur, which would not grow without the specific chemistry of sloth hair in a humid rainforest. In the moths whose life cycles depend on the sloth's weekly ritual. In the leaf chemistry it can tolerate, shaped by millions of years of eating the specific trees of a specific place, in the parasites and microbes adapted to its specific body and metabolism, in the knowledge of specific branches and roots passed from mother to offspring across generations. The sloth is not separable from its forest. It is a piece of the forest that has taken on the form of an animal, a slow, green, patient, extraordinary piece of the forest, hanging quietly from a branch, breathing slowly, watching the canopy with its gentle eyes. We have travelled far tonight, though always slowly. We began in the ancient forests, where giant ground sloths left their footprints in South American soil. We followed the evolutionary thread through 50 million years of patient adaptation. We arrived in the warm canopy of the modern rainforest, where the sloth hangs in its tree, doing less than almost any other mammal on Earth, and doing it with a kind of effortless mastery. The sloth is a mirror of sorts, not because we are like it. We are frenetic creatures by comparison, driven by metabolisms and nervous systems calibrated for urgency and action. But because it shows us that there are other ways, that slowness is not a failure, that rest is not waste, that doing only what is necessary and doing it with perfect efficiency is a viable and even beautiful way to be alive. The rainforests that the sloth inhabits are among the most threatened ecosystems on Earth. Every day, forest is lost to fires, to logging, to the slow creep of agricultural land. The sloths lose their trees, their roots, their home ranges. They find themselves on the ground where they should not be, or clinging to isolated fragments of canopy that can no longer sustain a whole life. Understanding the sloth, really understanding it as the complex, ancient, ecologically embedded creature it is one argument for protecting the forest it needs. Not because the sloth is cute, though it is. Not because it smiles, though it appears to, but because it is extraordinary. Because it represents something that cannot be replaced. A 50 million year experiment in patience and efficiency, tuned to the specific frequencies of a specific forest, irreplaceable in every particular. The forest needs the sloth, and the sloth entirely, completely needs the forest. Let's drift back one more time through the quiet places we visited tonight. We began with a giant, Megatherium, huge and slow, pulling down branches in an ancient American forest. We watched its descendants grow smaller and lighter over millions of years, climbing higher into the canopy, losing their ground-dwelling ancestors' gravity. We met the sloth's triple-chambered stomach, processing leaves over the course of a week, extracting energy with infinite patience from some of the least nutritious food in the forest. We felt the geometry of its tendons, the passive lock of its claws around a branch, requiring nothing but the animal's own weight to hold. We visited the fur, that remarkable living community of moths and algae and fungi and mites, the miniature rainforest on the rainforest animal. We followed the sloth on its weekly pilgrimage to the forest floor, burying its waste, hosting its moths, perhaps leaving its scent in the dark at the base of a familiar tree. We thought about the baby sloth, carried on its mother's chest, learning the forest through her movements, the particular trees, the particular paths, the particular leaves that are safe in this particular place. We thought about the decades of life that may follow, the long, slow accumulation of a green and quiet experience. We wondered, carefully and honestly, about what it is like to be a sloth, whether there is something it is like to hang in warm sunlight with a full stomach and the familiar texture of a known branch under your claws. Whether the apparent smile reflects anything we might recognize as contentment. Whether the sleeping sloth, drifting through its slow brain's quiet electrical patterns, is anywhere near what we would call dreaming. We don't know, we may never know, but the not knowing, held gently, is its own form of wonder. Now, let all of this settle. Let the green of the canopy soften in your mind. Let the facts dissolve into impression, and the impression dissolve into simply warmth and rest and the quiet. Feel your body where it lies, the weight of your limbs, the slight rise and fall of your chest, the small sounds of wherever you are, a house settling perhaps, or the distant sound of the world outside, already very far away. You have been still for a long time now, listening, and perhaps, in some small and honorary way, you have been a little like a sloth tonight, still in one place, letting the world pass by, taking in things slowly, resting in the shelter of a long, unhurried hour. The sloth is there, right now, somewhere in the warm dark of a Costa Rican forest, or a Peruvian river valley, or a Panamanian cloud forest. It is hanging from its branch in whatever position the branch and the temperature and the animal's own quiet preference have determined. Its heart is beating slowly. Its stomach is doing its long, patient work. The moths in its fur are going about their brief lives. The algae is absorbing what light filters through the canopy leaves. Everything is slow. Everything is sufficient. Everything is, in its own unhurried way, exactly as it should be. Let your breathing become a little slower now. Let each breath be a little longer on the exhale. A slow, complete release, like the sloth's weight settling into the geometry of its grip. Let the last tensions of the day go out with it. There is nothing left to hold tonight. No decisions to make. No lists to review. The day is over, and it was what it was. And now it is time to release it entirely. The way a forest releases its warmth at evening. Slowly, gradually, completely. Let your thoughts slow down. Let them become less insistent, less sequential, more like clouds than words, shapes drifting through rather than things to be grasped and held. You are warm, you are safe, you are still. Somewhere in the dark canopy, a sloth is hanging from its branch, and in its patient, ancient, extraordinary way, it is simply here, alive, breathing, resting in the forest. And so are you. If tonight's journey through the green world of the sloth brought you some peace, we would be gently grateful for a like before you drift off, or a quiet subscription so that future evenings can bring you more slow explorations of the world's most remarkable animals. There are many more gentle journeys waiting, through forests and oceans, through the lives of creatures great and small, each one a different window into the extraordinary, patient world of life on Earth. But for now, you don't need any of that. You need only rest. Let your eyes be heavy. Let your breath be slow. Let the canopy close gently above you, green and warm and full of quiet life. Sleep well, dear listener. Good night.